Hi, I'm Thomas Broadhead. I'm the editor of the Critical Performance edition of the Ives Fourth Symphony. And in this video, I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last video, in which I was discussing the performance of the Ives Fourth given in 2012 by the University of Kentucky at Lexington Symphony Orchestra, in which I got fabulous feedback from this wonderful undergrad orchestra. And one little correction that needed to be made to the parts is a wonderful segue into the next topic, which is the orchestra piano part. So without further ado, so I was on stage before a rehearsal, and I was talking with various players in the orchestra, and I began speaking with the players of the orchestra piano part, and they were these young lions who were really happy to tackle it, and they just were having a great time with it. And one player said, one thing that's kind of tricky, but it's fun to do, is over here in measure 47, where I'm having to put my right hand on top of my left hand to play these chords. And I thought, what? And so I looked and I saw this and I thought, oh no, that's an engraving error. The ottava over here at measure 48 needs to be pulled back to start at 47, because it's actually continuing an ottava from the previous measure, where the right hand has been playing an octave higher than the left hand. So it really should look like this. But it was an engraving error that I hadn't caught during my proofreading, and had this player not mentioned it, it probably would never have been corrected. So once again, it was so important for me to be there and interacting with musicians, because otherwise I wouldn't have known about this particular error and then wouldn't have been able to fix it. The next issue is a general issue about the layout of the part. There's an older practice of dividing music across the 2 pages of a 2-page spread in music for piano four hands, in which the primo player has its part on the right side of the divide, and the secondo player has the music on the left side of the divide. So the primo part would be on the recto and the secondo part would be on the verso. And that may work with transcriptions of Schubert symphonies and Haydn symphonies and things like that. But when you get into more complicated music, where it's essential for the players to understand the subdivisions that they're doing and how their parts interrelate, it can be really tricky to play from such a part, because then if you're trying to figure out what the other player is doing, your measure may be one part of the page in terms of the flow of the systems down the page, but the corresponding measure for the other player might be in a different location on the page, and then you have to sort of search for it and find it. And then if you're trying to compare things and work things out, it just becomes really confusing. And I looked through all the music, of course, to the orchestra piano part, and I saw that there's too many places where, for one, the players are almost touching hands as they're playing. It's like their pinkies are almost touching each other as they're grabbing chords and doing runs and so on. And I thought, well, there's certainly some place in there where one player will find it more easy to grab the notes of the other player, and if that music is just right there in the same system, they can just look down and grab it. If they had to look across the divide to try to find the chords on the other page, it would just be impossible, right? And there are also places where they're not playing in sync with each other, where one player has gone off playing in a separate tempo. And then the other player needs to be able to cue the other player back in. So for that reason, I decided, no, we're not going to divide this music across 2 pages each time. I'm going to have unified systems showing both parts so they can read and see what each other is doing, so they can help coordinate the combined part. So now let me talk about a few examples of where that paid off. Here is a simple example of the helpfulness of this kind of layout, and it's in the comedy movement, the second movement, in measure 178. And here we see that the players are playing this large-scale triplet against the 4/4 of each measure, and there are these chords that are being played but divided between the 2 players, and the chords in the bass clef, and the players in Lucerne said to me, you know, it doesn't make any sense that these notes in the secondo player are assigned to the secondo player. They can easily be grabbed by the primo player. And in terms of executing this rather complicated passage in the right hand, it makes sense for the whole thing to be done by the one player. I said, oh, well, would that help if I were to add these notes from the secondo part as cue notes and the primo part? I said, oh yeah, definitely do that. So in fact, I did. And so there they are in cue size notes. And then there is a little footnote at the bottom that says it might be easier for the primo player to play these chords alone, i.e. grabbing all 4 notes with the left hand rather than dividing the chords between the 2 players. Therefore, the secondo dyads are provided in cue size notes and the primo part. I went on to ask them if it would have been better overall if I had divided the 2 parts as described previously, you know, with putting the primo part on the recto pages and the secondo part on the verso pages. And like in unison, they said no. So that would made it far more complex. And then they began to detail all the things that I knew were likely problematic if it had been laid out that way. And so it confirmed to me that I had done the right thing. And then thereafter, I would ask players about this, and they would always say, no, it would have been a mistake to have done it that way. Let me show you another spot. So here is another passage in the second movement, and in it, the primo piano has this interesting notation where there are these series of parallelograms with repeat signs in them, and there's an instruction above the first one that says repeat, and then there's a note by Ives that says repeat the phrase faster and faster until at measure 254 it is twice as fast as it was originally at measure 250. So what he seems to mean here is this dum ba bum ba 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 is to be repeated faster and faster and faster until it is twice the original speed when the player comes to 254. And here's a place where that player is going to need to be cued by someone to stop accelerating the pattern and actually to begin coordinating with the main orchestra when measure 254 occurs. And that can come from a conductor who could cue the player, but the conductor is busy with so many things at that point in this part of the symphony that it's doubtful that any conductor will do that cueing. And I never observed, I think I only once observed a conductor who attended that. I put into the full score that the conductor should cue the piano at this point. And I remember one noticing that and attending to it, and that was helpful. But otherwise, they were the 2 players were relying on each other to figure these passages out and to keep in lockstep. So that's another example of where stacking the 2 parts and just presenting everything system by system rather than dividing things across each 2-page spread makes sense. And again, I asked players about this issue, and they always said that what had been done here was the only tenable solution, and they were glad that it was done this way. There's another issue in the orchestra piano part, and it is so tricky that I think it deserves its own video, and it has to do with an ossia in the second movement, which requires 2 different notational realizations. So that will be the subject of the next video.